Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're going to talk about pressure. We're boiling this down to just one topic. We've talked about pressure in other videos mixed with other topics, but today I want to devote this video just to pressure, just to make sure that you have a clear understanding, not the way many Western hunters think about it, but the way it actually works on elk and mule deer, because pressure is one of the most misunderstood forces in Western hunting, and misunderstanding it is why so many hunters feel like animals just vanished overnight. A lot of hunters think pressure is a location problem, and it can be. Too many people here, too many trucks, too many boot tracks. And when they don't see animals where they expected to, the assumption is simple. The elk or deer left the unit. They packed up and moved somewhere else. But that explanation can be wrong. Animals don't respond to pressure the way humans do. Hunters react emotionally to pressure. Animals react efficiently. They don't panic and abandon familiar ground just because pressure shows up. They adjust how and when they move to survive it. And that difference is everything. Pressure isn't just about where people are, it's about how people move, when they move, and how predictable that movement becomes. Animals pick up on those patterns pretty quickly. They learn when humans are most active, where access funnels pressure, and which terrain features allow them to stay hidden while still meeting their daily needs. When pressure increases, animals don't necessarily disappear. They usually compress movement, shift timing, and become harder to see. This is why pressure analysis is evergreen. It matters in archery season, rifle season, early, late, public land, private edges. None of that changes the fundamentals. Pressure reshapes behavior, not just geography. And if you don't understand that, you end up chasing ghosts instead of positioning yourself for more opportunity. In this episode, I'm going to break down the real relationship between human movement and animal movement. We'll talk about why animals rarely leave entire units, how pressure reshapes daily patterns like feeding and bedding, and why timing matters more than location once the pressure builds. Most importantly, you're going to learn how to stop reacting to pressure and start using it to make better decisions in the field. If you've ever felt like elk or mule deer vanished the moment hunting pressure showed up, this episode will help change how you look at that problem and how you hunt around it. One of the biggest reasons hunters misunderstand pressure is because they assume animals respond to it the same way humans would. They don't. Humans move with intention driven by plans, schedules, and emotion. Animals move with efficiency driven by survival. It's that simple. When you blur that difference, pressure feels random and unpredictable. When you understand it and separate it, pressure becomes one of the most reliable variables in the field. Human movement in the mountains is surprisingly consistent. Hunters use the same trailheads, the same access points, the same ridge lines, and the same glassing knobs year after year. A lot of people move during the same hours, take similar routes, and avoid the same difficult terrain. Even when hunters think they're being creative, their movement usually falls into very predictable patterns. Animals pick up on that pretty quickly. Elk and deer don't need to understand why humans are there. They only need to recognize where human movement occurs, how often it happens, and when it's most likely. Over time, pressure doesn't scare animals, it educates them. And educated animals don't flee blindly, they adjust efficiently for their needs. Animal movement under pressure becomes tighter, quieter, and more deliberate. Instead of traveling long distances, animals shorten their routes. Instead of moving during daylight, they shift movement windows earlier, later, or into lower light transitions. Instead of using obvious travel corridors, they favor covered routes that offer quick escape options. They aren't leaving, they're threading themselves through terrain in ways that minimize exposure. This is where hunters get confused. When animals stop moving the way they expect, hunters assume they're gone. In reality, the animals are still using the same general areas, just differently. Human movement tends to be linear and repetitive. Animal movement becomes layered and adaptive. Pressure doesn't just cause chaos, it creates refinement. And once you stop projecting human reactions onto animals, you're going to start seeing patterns instead of absence. That's the shift a lot of hunters never make, and it's why pressure feels mysterious instead of useful. One of the most common mistakes I see a lot of hunters make is treating pressure like a permanent condition tied to a specific place. Too many trucks at a trailhead, too many boot tracks on a ridge, too many people glassing the same basin. And the assumption becomes that the area is blown out. But pressure isn't static, it moves, pulses, and fades. And animals respond to when pressure happens far more than where it happens. Most hunting pressure follows a schedule. People move at predictable times, right? Early mornings, mid mornings, late afternoons. They hike in, glass, still hunt a little bit, and hike out. That rhythm repeats day after day. Animals learn those patterns pretty quickly. When pressure increases, elk and deer don't necessarily abandon the area. They simply stop moving during the windows when people are most active. This is why hunters often say, there were elk here yesterday and now they're gone. In reality, the animals are still using the same terrain, but their movement windows have shifted. Feeding may happen later at night. Travel may occur earlier in the morning or in short, efficient bursts between cover. Bedding may slide slightly into thicker, more secure terrain without changing elevation or general location. When you hunt the right place at the wrong time, it feels empty. And once enough hunters experience that at once, the narrative becomes that pressure pushed everything out. What actually happened is that pressure reshaped timing, not the geography. That doesn't change, right? This is where pressure aware hunters separate themselves. Instead of abandoning whole areas too quickly, they ask better questions. When is pressure highest here? When does it drop off? What movement windows does that create for animals? Where can animals move safely while people are least active? And that last one's my favorite because it focuses on where they go, usually the nastiest hole where people don't want to. Pressure compresses daylight activity, it doesn't erase it. And when you understand that, you stop chasing fresh sign that's already cooled and start positioning for delayed or shortened movement. Timing is the lever a lot of hunters never pull. It's often the one that puts animals back into empty country. One of the most persistent myths in Western hunting is that animals simply pack up and leave a unit when pressure shows up. Hunters love to see it that way. When hunters see fewer animals, hear fewer bugles, or stop cutting fresh tracks, and assume the country is empty. In most cases, elk and deer don't abandon entire units just because people are present. Leaving familiar ground is risky, and animals avoid unnecessary risk whenever possible. Elk and deer survive by knowing their environment. They understand where the feed is, where the water is, how wind moves through the terrain, and which routes offer the best escape when something goes wrong. That local knowledge is a massive advantage for them, right? Walking away from it means stepping into unknown terrain, unfamiliar pressure, and new threats. Animals don't give up that easy. What pressure actually does is force animals to lean harder into what they already know. Instead of using obvious travel routes, they shift into secondary paths. Instead of bedding in open, visible locations, they slide into thicker cover or terrain that limits approach options. Instead of moving broadly across a landscape, they shrink their footprint and operate inside tighter and more secure zones. This is why pressured animals feel harder to find, not further away. They're still there, but they're using terrain more efficiently than you are a lot of times. They're moving less, exposing themselves less, and choosing positions that give them better escape options. Hunters mistake reduced visibility for absence.
Step into the backcountry and step up your elk hunting game at Elk Camp 2026. This isn't a seminar, it's an immersive experience with real field training alongside successful elk hunters Matt and Saxton Hartsky. You'll learn how elk think and move, break down terrain like a pro, call with confidence, and practice 3 days of real-world elk hunting scenarios that mirror what you'll face on your own hunt. This camp was built to bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be in the mountains. With limited spots and hands-on coaching, you'll walk away sharper, more prepared, and ready to hunt with purpose and confidence. Elk Camp 2026. Sharpen your edge. Register now and prepare for the season like never before at backboneunlimited.com.
Now, for all the naysayers out there are times animals do relocate. Major weather events might push them. Extreme disturbance or long term habitat changes can push the movement. But day to day hunting pressure rarely reaches that threshold unless there's an open burn. More often, animals make micro adjustments that keep them within the same general area while dramatically reducing their encounters. Understanding this changes how you scout and hunt. Instead of abandoning country too quickly, you start looking for how animals could still be using it. Your focus becomes overlooked cover, awkward terrain, and features that absorb the pressure. The hunters who consistently find animals in pressured units aren't luckier. They're just operating under a more accurate understanding of how animals actually respond to the pressure. When pressure increases, elk and deer don't change where they live nearly as much as they change how they operate inside that space. Their daily patterns tighten, movement becomes shorter, quieter, and far more intentional. This is where a lot of hunters lose track of animals, not because the animals are gone, but because the patterns hunters expect no longer exist. Under low pressure, animals can afford to be sloppy. They move longer distances, feed more openly, and travel during broader daylight windows. As pressure builds, those margins disappear. Feeding happens closer to cover. Travel routes become more concealed. Bedding locations prioritize security over visibility or comfort. The entire day compresses into fewer, safer decisions for the animals. One of the biggest shifts is timing. Pressure pushes movement into the edges of daylight or into short windows when human activity drops. Animals may move for 10 or 15 minutes instead of an hour. They may stage just inside cover instead of stepping into open basins or meadows. If you aren't in position when that window happens, it feels like nothing moved at all. Pressure also increases selectivity. Animals use terrain features that limit approach angles and provide multiple escape options. They favor benches, finger ridges, thick edges, and broken ground where visibility is limited and sound carries poorly. These aren't random choices, they're calculated responses to predictable human movement. Another overlooked change is how animals respond to repeated disturbance. Instead of fleeing far, they often cycle within a smaller area, using loops, side hill routes, or parallel travel paths that allow them to monitor pressure without exposing themselves. Hunters expecting straight line travel miss those movements entirely. This is why pressured animals feel invisible at times. They aren't covering ground the way you want them to. They're covering ground the way they need to. When you understand how pressure reshapes daily patterns, you stop hunting big movements and start hunting smaller windows. That shift is what keeps you in the game when pressure is high and mistakes are punished quickly. Pressure doesn't act on animals in a vacuum. Terrain is what determines whether pressure actually displaces animals or simply reshapes how they move. We talked about this in a video just a couple episodes ago. This is where most hunters misread what's happening. They see pressure increase and assume animals must leave without asking whether the terrain even requires them to. Good terrain absorbs pressure. It gives elk and deer options to move unseen, options to bed with wind advantage, options to escape without burning energy. When terrain offers all of those solutions, animals stay. It's simple. They don't need to vacate an area if they can solve pressure problems within it. Think about where pressure concentrates: trails, ridge lines, benches with easy walking, obvious glassing points, and access routes. Now think about where pressure avoids: steep side hills, broken timber, right? Awkward transitions between cover types, terrain with poor footing, bad lines of sight, or inefficient travel. Those nasty holes you don't want to go in. Animals know this as well as any experienced hunter. Under pressure, elk and deer slide into terrain that limits human effectiveness. They favor features that reduce approach angles and force hunters into predictable paths. Terrain that allows animals to see, smell, or hear danger early becomes far more valuable to them than open feeding areas areas or scenic basins. Those features don't have to be extreme, they just have to be inconvenient for humans. This is why pressured animals are often found closer to people than expected, not further away. I've caught them really close to roads and parking areas before if you happen to end up in a nasty pocket. They're using terrain that people walk past or avoid entirely. They're letting the terrain do the work in protection instead of distance. Hunters who only think in terms of elevation bands or big escape routes miss this completely. Terrain also allows animals to stay within their home range while remaining hidden. Small shifts, one bench over, one finger ridge deeper, one layer of cover thicker, can drastically reduce encounters without changing location on a map. When you understand how terrain absorbs pressure, scouting changes. You stop asking where animals went, start asking where terrain allows them to stay. That question is far more productive, and it's one of the most overlooked by hunters. A lot of guys don't ask that. And that's one of the reasons why I feel like we've been successful a lot of times, especially during late rifle seasons when there is a lot of pressure. We're hunting the nasty stuff that people just don't want to climb into. I see it all the time, whether they're glassing from across a drainage or they're trying to skirt and walk above or below those nasty pockets. One of the biggest advantages a hunter can develop is the ability to read pressure without ever seeing another person. Most hunters only recognize pressure when they physically run into it. Other trucks, other hunters, camps, or fresh boot tracks. By then, they're reacting late. Pressure leaves signs long before people do. Access points tell the first part of the story. Trailheads, pullouts, gates, and roads all dictate where pressure originates and how it flows. From there, human movement follows the path of least resistance. How many guys do you know that go walking through the deadfall? They pick the easiest spot they can, right? Well-worn trails, gentle ridges, benches with easy walking, and direct routes between obvious features attract repeated use. Even if nobody is there today, those paths tell you where pressure has been recently. Animal sign also changes under pressure. Tracks don't disappear, they tighten. You'll see fewer large meandering trails and more subtle side hill tracks hugging cover. Droppings may concentrate in tighter areas instead of spreading across feeding zones. Beds shift into positions with better wind or escape routes. Those aren't random changes, those are pressure responses. Another overlooked indicator is how pressure stacks over time. A single morning of pressure doesn't have the same effect as repeated days of predictable movement. Animals tolerate short disruptions. What forces adjustment is the consistency of the pressure. When you recognize that pressure is fading midweek, poor weather, or after opening weekends, you can anticipate when movement patterns will relax slightly. Glassing behavior matters too. If animals are visible only briefly and consistently vanish into cover at certain times, that timing is telling you something. Animals don't just disappear at random, they disappear when pressure peaks. Reading pressure in real time means constantly asking what the landscape is telling you, the terrain, right? Not what you hoped would happen. When you learn to interpret access movement corridors, sign, and timing all together, pressure stops being a mystery and it becomes information. And information lets you move with intention instead of just reacting blindly to what already happened. Once you understand how pressure actually works, it stops being something you fear and starts becoming something you can use. Pressure doesn't ruin hunts in and of itself, it redistributes opportunity. Most hunters leave when pressure increases. The hunters who stay and adapt are the ones who benefit. One of the biggest advantages pressure creates is predictability. When human movement becomes consistent, animal movement becomes structured in response. Hunters who push animals out of obvious areas often unknowingly move them into terrain that offers security and escape. If you're positioned on those or in those secondary routes, edges, or transition zones, pressure works for you instead of against you. This is where patience matters. A lot of hunters abandon good country too early because they expect immediate results. Pressure-aware hunters let pressure do its work. They stay in areas that still make sense based on terrain, cover, and escape options, even when daylight activity is limited. They wait for short movement windows, delayed movement, or subtle repositioning instead of chasing noise. Another advantage is using other hunters as information. Tracks, camps, and and access points tell you where pressure is coming from and which directions animals are likely to avoid or slide into. You don't need to race crowds. You need to understand how crowds shape movement. Often the best opportunities come from hunting parallel to pressure instead of directly away from it. Pressure also creates edges. Boundaries between high use and low use terrain become funnels. Animals skirt pressure rather than fleeing from it, using cover and terrain features to stay close while remaining hidden. Those edges are rarely obvious on a map, but they show up consistently in the field. Using pressure well requires restraint. It means trusting your read of terrain and movement instead of reacting emotionally. When you stop trying to beat pressure and start positioning around it, hunts slow down in a good way. Pressure stops feeling like chaos and starts feeling like structure. And structure is something you can hunt effectively. Pressure is one of the few constants in Western hunting. Seasons change, weather changes, animal numbers fluctuate, but human pressure, it's always going to be there, especially nowadays, and it always shapes animal behavior. The hunters who struggle year after year usually aren't failing because they don't work hard or care enough. They're failing because they misunderstand what pressure actually does. Pressure doesn't empty units overnight. It doesn't randomly scatter elk or deer across the map. It refines movement. It compresses timing. It pushes animals into terrain that solves problems efficiently for the animals instead of dramatically. When you misread that, you spend your hunt chasing what already happened instead of positioning yourself for what's coming next. Once you understand pressure, scouting becomes clear. You stop overreacting to other hunters and start reading how access, timing, and terrain and predictability all interact. You recognize when animals are still there but moving differently. You learn to trust good country longer, hunt smaller windows better, and let pressure work in your favor instead of against you. This is what separates reactive hunters from deliberate ones. Reactive hunters chase sightings, bugles, and fresh stories. Deliberate hunters hunt structure, pressure, terrain, timing, and movement patterns that repeat no matter what season it is. That's how consistency is built on public land, especially in heavily pressured units. Pressure isn't something to escape, it's something to understand. And once you do, it stops feeling like chaos and starts feeling like information you can use to hunt better. Now, if you're serious about taking this kind of preparation deeper, that's exactly why I built Team Backbone. It's more than just a membership, it's an inner circle for hunters who want to train with purpose, hunt smarter, and stop guessing whether they're actually prepared. Inside Team Backbone, you get 20% off site wide on all Backbone Unlimited gear, the option to have a t shirt shipped to your door every month, and full access to the digital content vault. That vault includes training advice, backcountry strategies, checklists, guides, and mindset tools built specifically for Western hunters. You'll also get full access to a private Facebook group with direct access to me and a community of driven hunters who live relentless, plus direct call, text, or email access to me for personalized advice on training, hunting strategy, or just sharpening your edge. On top of that, you're automatically entered into exclusive monthly gear giveaways. This is built for the hunters who want to do things right, not just do them hard. If that's you, Team Backbone is waiting for you at backboneunlimited.com underneath the membership tab. Thanks for being here. I appreciate all of you. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.